Hey, Dr. Johnson.
Hi, Alexander.
How are you?
I'm fine. I had some problems getting on. I had to go back to my old computer.
Yeah, I had a little bit of an issue getting on too. But I'm here.
It was regarding to my LinkedIn and wasn't accepting my signage. I don't.
I was the same thing happened to me. I couldn't sign into my LinkedIn either. I had
Okay.
to go through a couple different email accounts, which is strange because I had it all what I thought pretty well set up beforehand.
Yeah. It looked a lot clearer on my other computer than this one. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. I'm just gonna
So if I
put
look a little dark, I apologize. I'm not. It's the light. It's the computer. It's the camera.
okay. I'm just gonna put something on Facebook really quick, and then we can jump in if you'd like.
Sure.
Cool. All right.
How the lighting is in here.
How are things on the East
Actually,
Coast for you?
uh, it's okay. It's pretty busy.
Mhm.
This is better. Yeah, this is better. Um, hmm.
Go ahead and upload.
Do this. And,
And is it echoey on
not at all.
me? Okay, good.
No.
Cool.
I'm sorry for the noise. We're in the country, so
No, you're fine.
people get on their dune buggies and
I totally
all
understand.
that stuff. Let me see. How did I even get in here now? I don't even remember how I got. Oh, I had to. So I had to sign up. I had to sign up on LinkedIn
Oh,
to
that's
even get
interesting.
in.
I
I
can
had to sign
fix
up,
that
and then I
here.
had to. You had to let me in. So I'm going to try to go to Zoom and see if you'll let me in. But see,
Okay.
it's defaulting and saying. It's saying, okay, let me use this meeting ID. Forgive me. Wait a minute, that's not going to work. Okay, let me do this. Because it's defaulting to my Zoom account, which is
Mm,
interesting. This is very interesting. Here, let me just put in, I'm going to put save. Okay, I got it. I can't do this right now.
you're
Let me
good.
put in join meeting. Okay, I'm going to just join the meeting. And I'm going to get out off this because I want to be on this computer if that's okay.
No, that's totally fine.
All right. I'm going to join this meeting. You just let me. Oh gosh, now it wants a passcode. There wasn't a passcode. Let me see. Was there a passcode? There wasn't a passcode. There wasn't a passcode.
Try passcode KJ.
Okay, one moment.
Oh, sorry.
Cat
K.
little K?
Yeah, little K, and then
Uh-huh.
the next capital J, capital T, the number seven, the number two, and then a little J, lowercase J.
Yep, there I am. It's gonna. Okay, you have to let me in.
Okay,
Okay,
I will
I'm
right
gonna
now.
get out of this.
Okay, let's let you in.
Hi, Alexander.
Hey, Dr. Johnson.
Okay, beautiful. This is
Cool. All
excellent.
right. Let me make this last post on Facebook, and then we can just get to the good stuff. All right. Invite. Oh yeah, that quality is great.
It's totally different, isn't it?
Yeah. All right. So I'm just gonna post this. Sweet. So I will just let people roll in as they'd like, and you and I can go ahead and start the conversation.
Okay.
So I've invited you to have a pretty candid dialogue with some structured questions, and I will give you kind of a background on where this idea, I guess, kind of sparked from. But I'd also like to introduce folks, since this will be recorded, to you and to myself. My name is Alexander T. McPherson, and I'm joined today by with Dr. General C. Johnson, my mentor and a great inspiration to myself as a Black man here in Portland, living in America, and having your guidance and leadership is, I would just want to say, very helpful to me and very inspiring. So thank you for being willing to have a conversation about some pretty hot button topics, both from the past as well as the present, and really wanting to get your insight, knowledge, and background as a scholar practitioner, as a physician, an educator, and as a Black man and business owner here in America. And so we'll be touching on some things themed around this term, this kind of little catchphrase that came to me in a thought, which was just, how do we reimagine our collective humanity, right? And this idea has really been sparked, I would say, by a lot of our conversations over the past 5 years that I've been working as your mentee, as well as your colleague in some of our positions at in our professional roles. And so I was, the idea that had kind of came to me was, how do we reimagine, as I said, our collective humanity and our collective oneness as people? And without, in all honesty, this thought came at a point of reflection when I was feeling as if, I was downtown at here in Portland, Oregon, I was observing a protest by the Black Lives Matter group, and what I'm going to assume, and I don't want to make assumptions as though they're definitive, but just based on my observation, it looked like a very typical left protest versus a right protest. Present were Black Lives Matter protesters, as well as on the other end, some conservative Blue Lives Matter and Trump supporters. And what really got me was there was a division in the street. And on one side, you have Trump supporters, and on the other, you have Black Lives Matter supporters protesting. And, some of them are peacefully protesting, others are being more antagonistic. And what I really thought was, what are we really saying things differently, each group? And so this idea came to me that what if each group was able to sit down and have a conversation with one another about why they believed what they believed, as opposed to yelling and screaming, from, sometimes, nasty words at each other, and other times, even just, maybe trying to get across their point of view, but, you're yelling across the street at somebody who's in opposition to what you believe. And again, this question came to me: how do we reimagine how we protest, maybe, or how do we reimagine how we connect with folks on a more humanitarian level? Because I think at the same day, when we go to the ballot box, how could our political beliefs, maybe on polar ends of the spectrum, be working against each other? But we think, oh, because my party tells me to go against what you're doing, and my party tells me to go against this, we end up just tearing each other apart. And that's what I'm wondering, like, how do we reimagine a collective humanity? And so, a lot of our conversations have centered around, and some of the things that some of the participants may have looked at. And I've discussed in advertising this is, how does bias and how does behavior and how do our brains all play a role in what I was observing at this protest? Like, one side saying, screw you, the other side saying, no, saying the opposite. And I'm like, are we really saying anything's fundamentally different? So I kind of wanted to start with that, and I'll kick off there, but I'll have some other structured questions for you as well.
Sure, Alexander, thank you. And thank you for your time as well, mentee extraordinaire. I think that's a very interesting question. I also respect the fact that that's your question.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
if I
Yes.
start with anything, I realize that that is your question.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what
That
I'm
is my
hearing from
question.
you
Mm-hmm.
is, from your observation, you're wondering how you can reimagine
Right. Right. Yes.
how we
Yes.
get back to our own humanity. With that,
Yes. Yeah, like an idea we're more collective,
with that,
a little bit more
we'll have
civil.
it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. More respectful, more civil,
Right.
more seeing that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Because without one, where are the other?
Right.
Where is the where are the others?
Right.
And we are community. We are a community of people. We're a collective body of people, and we have ways of being that are not always similar. So there's some dissimilar ways of being, and there's some similar ways of being. There's things that we do fundamentally in terms of our basic needs, or how we carry those activities out, or the necessity for having basic needs. And so, in our ability to commingle or convene together, what some of what you're witnessing is how divided we are. Yet yet you are witnessing so many people being in spaces occupying similar space, but yet they were very separate.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and, so,
Yes.
and interestingly too, it sounds like from what you're gathering is that everybody's right.
Right.
And
Right.
they're right in terms of with of their belief,
Mm-hmm.
or how that belief is shaped, or there's rightness in terms of their that one having a sense that they are right,
Mm-hmm.
in how they're either rationalizing, or how they're taking what they feel is factual
Mm-hmm.
information, and therefore drawing conclusions based on what may be factual for them
Right.
or
Right.
otherwise.
Right.
And so every group appears to be doing the same thing.
Right.
It's just that they're doing that. Um, those things that they are thinking or feeling happen to be different from the other.
Right.
And then there's all
Right.
of us, right?
Right.
And, so,
Right.
and for a very long time, uh, collectively, uh, there's been operation from, the dominant correctness.
Mm-hmm.
This is correct. This is how it's done. This is how you get successful. This is how you build a family. Everything has often had to look like whoever was occupying the dominant center
Mm-hmm.
of centrality of where all these right things came from.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think, if I'm hearing you, if I'm hearing the question, which is thankfully rhetorical,
Yes.
uh, it makes me also challenge myself in answering it, to think about, um, bias in general, or we
Mm-hmm.
can say implicit bias or biases in general, of
Mm-hmm.
which they're dormant in everyone,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that basically, for example, can look like, oh, I see you in uh, you on flannel shirt, and I'm just at this moment, and this is just an example. I'm just
Mm-hmm.
having a moment of just really not really feeling the Pacific Northwest right now.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these other elements about why I may not be feeling the Pacific Northwest right now. You come flannel shirt, and so as a result of that, it totally takes me away from the idea that you're an individual that has your own set of ideas and personality and life experiences that make you who you are. But I can't get past the flannel shirt to get to you. So
Mm-hmm.
automatically, I'm just like, okay, I can't deal with this. I can't talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
He's silent. And in essence, you are invisible to me because of the flannel shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever bias I have around flannel shirts or people who wear them,
Mm-hmm.
and if I'm using that as an example, coupled with the fact that I have in this moment, a disdain for being in the Pacific Northwest, of which I chose to be here,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm making you and anyone else that has a flannel shirt invisible to me because I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
And basically what that's saying is that I can't. I can, but I can't because I can't get past my bias. Whatever that may mean around what it is you're wearing, what it is you're reading. Oh, he didn't smile long enough, or his smile seemed one way and it could have been another. All of those things mirror what's going on in some way, shape, or form with me. Right? But it's an implicit, because in this example it is, because I have, as to further the example, I may not have any real awareness of why I
You
have
feel
the
that way.
same
Right.
shirt.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? And so
Yes.
once you say,
Yes.
oh, it's because he's black, it's because he's white, it's because he's mixed, it's because he's Filipino, he's this, that, and the other. And really and truly, I haven't even gotten there myself, because I had some issue with a flannel shirt. And it could be rooted in trauma, whatever the case may be. This certainly isn't meant to be a judgment, but it's just an example of how much we operate and move within our world with the ease of implicit biases.
Sure.
All the time. And it's just, the problem is, and there are many, is to not take the time to reflect on that. And just immediately, and this happens really quickly. We're just talking about it. It just happens really quickly. I could very well have an implicit bias toward people who wear flannel shirts. But what I'm also recognizing in the space and time in which I occupy in this universe is that that's mine. And I'm like, oh, flannel shirt, okay.
Right.
I wouldn't wear it, but it looks like he could be a really nice guy.
Right. Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
How are you doing today? I'm not going to make you invisible automatically because you fit the 10 criteria of what's not right with America.
Right. Right.
You know, and it could come from something that I heard as a youngster. It could come from something that happened in terms of a trauma. It could be anything. And again, those are just examples. But my point in saying all that is, we could sit around and talk about everything that's not right. And a lot of the wrongness of what we're calling out or calling in could be relative to anything that we have a visible eye to see or audible ear to hear. Those are lenses by which we choose to see things or we choose to hear things, right? Some of those things could be really rooted in truth of experiences that we have had on our own. And some of those things can be the truth of experiences that other people share with us, who we believe in, who we love, or whatever the case may be, or what we choose to accept as truth, right? And so in doing that, right, in what ways do we start to honor the humanity of ourselves in relationship to the humanity of the other? And what I mean by that is this: in terms of reimagining, to reimagine would mean that there's something that is askew with the current imagination. Right? So for what reason would we need to reimagine anything that's already been imagined?
Right.
We could
That's a fair question.
for a variety of reasons, right? We were seeing something that is just maybe a departure from what the multiple aspects of what humanity holds, or we could have an acceptance of what those multiple aspects that humanity is currently holding now and say, you know what? Well, what if it was this way? Think about what Walt Disney did. Interestingly enough, we have Disney World, just by way of example, and that was his imagination coming to life in manifest physical form. And what's interesting about that, it's still developing consistently. Things he laid down, things he wrote about, things he planned and conceptualized. And it's like, and we still call it Disney World. And he invites us into his imagination. He's been gone for several decades now, but his world is still continuing on. And we get to go into that imagined world all the time, into that defined space, defined activities all the time. And then when we leave and go back across that border, we're back into the main world again. You know, interesting, right? So we get a pass into the imagination of Walt Disney. we pay a price for it, but we
Uh-huh.
kept going and just think about how the world could be. I remember I went one year,
Wow.
and
Wow.
I
Wow.
met a really good friend, and so we hadn't seen each other in quite some time. He says, "Well, meet me over in Morocco at Epcot Center," and I just thought, I get to go to Morocco to see my friend who I haven't seen in years for lunch, right? And I'm at Epcot Center, and everything about that space and Epcot Center and that particular space we're in reflected as much about Morocco as it possibly could. But for a brief moment of 2 hours, we were in Walt Disney World, occupying a space in Morocco. And everything about it was like we were in Morocco. So I'm just saying, like, so
Mm.
we have so much potential there,
Mm-hmm.
because if we think about our intention and what it is that we intend, in terms of our world and how we intend the shape of our world to actually be,
Mm-hmm.
how we could coexist, right? We can't depart that imagination from our humanity, right? If we do that, we're making a conscious decision to think differently about what we imagine relative to what it is that we experience,
Say
right?
more. Mm-hmm.
Well, for
Mm-hmm.
instance,
I'm following.
what is the real it's 2020 and we
Mm-hmm.
have to remind people how to treat one another,
Hmm.
um, how to respect one another. Um, but within that, there are certain times that we come together and we say, okay, for the next hour and a half or 2 hours, because I'm in a, like, quote unquote, as an example, a religious place, I'm going to be really kind and nice because that's what God would want me to be. But when we're outside that space, right, are we not that way?
Mm.
Right. So again, I go
Sure.
back to the
Sure.
imagined world of Walt Disney. So I
Mm-hmm.
get to go and I get to leave all of this stuff that's going on in my world right now. And I get to go to Disney World
Mm.
and see how the imagined world could really be.
Wow. Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
juxtaposing that to just kind of everyday life. And I'm using religious congregations as a way of saying
Mm-hmm.
we collectively and consciously can come together during specified or occupied times within a given day. And for the length of time that we're there, we are centering ourselves on things that are of a nature that don't necessarily directly reflect what's happening outside that world.
Mm. It's almost a
So,
polar opposite to that
right,
division.
exactly. And we can do that at any given time. So what is it that makes us want to go down to wherever it is that we're going, and we're going to have this group that's here, we're going to have that group that's there, this group is going to go over here, and this group is going to go over there, and they all seem to be opposed, but yet they're fighting for what they feel is the same right that they feel
Yes.
should be able to experience every single day, right? So is that individualized humanity,
Mm.
right? Is
Mm-hmm.
that collective humanity? um, the contribution to both can't be without the individual.
Mm. Yes.
That's the individual consciousness or humanity, or the collective humanity of the
Mm-hmm.
group.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to, in reimagining that, we have to reimagine with the lens, if we're talking about humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then we have to reimagine within ourselves first,
Yes.
from a lens that doesn't either bifurcate or individualize and separate.
Yes. Yes.
And I
Yes.
think that's where we can start to really, that's one way in which we can start to really answer that question.
No, thank you. That was.
Not,
Mm.
it's really not as complex as I probably made it sound.
Mm. No, no, I'm with you.
I had to throw in some examples because I don't think that that's necessarily an easy question. I think
Right.
it's a very good question. And I think that that question shouldn't be easy.
Mm-hmm.
It does require a degree of complexity because this is a complex world that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
And we've made it that way. We've made it that way. And sometimes that's been out of survival, sometimes that's been out of sustenance. And sometimes we have to reflect on how we make things, and we have to reflect on how we can make things better than they currently are,
Yes. Yes.
or than they have been. And so anytime we're going back to the piece about humanity, then we have to recognize the importance of encompassing all of what that actually means.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't be separatists in humanity and then all be humanly,
Right.
have a human collective, right?
Right.
You're part of a collective of people who are expressing or desiring to understand, work toward cultivating or mastering their own personal humanity. But then there's the collective humanity as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very, it's very challenging and difficult
Mm-hmm.
to not include that. And there's something I think that's very universal about that. Um, uh, Without articulation, there's an inner knowing, I feel, that strives towards some collective union.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are a variety of ways in which we work toward that achievement.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think sometimes our own insecurities, whether they be personal or collective insecurities, collective, I mean like groups, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it can be, tend to make us go to some default of what we would then be like a survival mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
a defense, if you will, of survival of the self and then survival of the group.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting, and sometimes the reasons behind that as we grow and as we work toward cultivating a higher level, deeper level of humanity in ourselves and collectively find, well, that really wasn't the best reason to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think fundamentally there's a just fundamentally there's an inner awareness and knowing of from a universal or collective example of just things that are just really inherently, it just doesn't feel right to do that. Even if we see
Mm-hmm.
someone being treated inappropriately, there's just something within us that says, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that justified?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think there's collective uh, uh, senses around that as well. And I think at any given time, those can be challenged,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore some of our action or some of our rationale, although at the time it may have seemed like the right
Mm-hmm.
thing to do, we find that there's probably a better way that it could have been done.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think some of the things that we're witnessing on a regular basis definitely reflect that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's multiple lenses by which um, some of these things are being concluded.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of those are drawing from things that are centuries old.
Mm-hmm.
Some are drawing from things that are quite new
Mm-hmm.
and just very different. We are in some ways um, being challenged to face what we have thought of or considered to be normative.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, what's been normal for us, because
Mm-hmm.
now we've all been challenged by by COVID-19, which nobody can see. You know, it's like
Mm-hmm.
this invisible, you
Mm-hmm.
know, but very it's invisible, but yet we see its impact. It's very, very interesting,
Mm-hmm.
and seeing how that impacts individual and collective humanity in terms of how we respond or how we don't
Mm-hmm.
respond,
Mm-hmm.
and the things that come up kind of gives us a little awareness of the core of where one's default really is, or where one is choosing it to be, or has chosen it to be for survival mechanisms. And it's very interesting to see how that gets played out. And then again, there's that fundamental knowing.
Mm-hmm.
That's just, there's this just a fundamental internal knowing of seeking balance with self and with other,
Mm-hmm.
you know, versus seeking division within self and other.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
the more natural draw is towards seeking the balance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
we have as human beings, we have you know, we have the neocortex, so we have the ability to reason. We can make decisions that we can really think something through, although we do that very, very rapidly and quickly, or we can do it in a more concerted fashion as well.
Mm-hmm.
My point is that we don't have to just always react to things. We can
Mm-hmm.
actually sit down and really think about it. And some of the things that we can really think about is whether or not an action or inaction is actually worth it at the end of the day. Is it worth it to ourselves? Is it worth it to another?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
being able to be reflective about the potential impact of a thought and action, an inaction, a counter thought. You know, all these things, you know, get really, really become really integral to ultimately any decision that we make, and whatever decision that we do make anyway, even if it's on our personal or collective humanity, is going to impact the whole.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the nature of the decision in and of itself that determines the strength of that impact. But nonetheless, it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's something happening. You know, it's an interesting dance, but the possibility of a perspective being from one's own, sometimes that's invited more or less depending on where the individual is within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, any willingness to maybe accept a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We can have you and I can have a disagreement about something. For instance, by example, you can say, well, you seem to be really upset, and I can be looking right at you saying, actually, I'm not upset. And you know, you can say, but you seem to be really upset, and I'm saying, well, actually, I'm not upset. And I could say, well, Alexander, why do you think that I'm upset? Well, da 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 da. And I'm like, but I'm not feeling any of that. So then we have to determine whether or not you have the willingness to say, okay, well, I thought he was upset, but now that he's telling me that he's really not, I guess he really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
So you can choose to accept what I feel is my truth,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if you've been waiting on that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, explanation,
Mm-hmm.
or you can choose to stay exactly where you are.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? It
Yes.
can really
Yes.
be that simple. I
Yes.
think the lack of ease in that has to do with ourselves.
With self. With self.
Right. So we can be on opposite sides of the street, very things. But the sign doesn't know that it's a sign.
Mm-hmm.
We say it's a sign, so
Mm-hmm.
it's a sign.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know any different.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Outside of what we
But
give to it.
Right. The difference is in ourselves. The sign doesn't. A color doesn't know that it's a color.
Mm-hmm.
The color is the color because that's what we say it is.
Mm-hmm. And if we so determine that to be
So
different,
no matter what that sign says what it is that we want it to say.
Right.
That's the only power that the sign has, is what we put on it.
Sure.
But the
So
sign in of itself has no tangible power.
none.
It's something that we make and we call it a sign.
Right. And then we put whatever intention, message, belief we project onto it. And I think that in seeing that it's, again, creating another dividing line.
Right.
It reinforces my division, or it reinforces my unity, or it reinforces
Yeah.
what it is that I believe in and support. And you've touched on some really, really interesting, as you always do, as you always do.
I wasn't trying to.
I think that's fantastic. And I think because I promised some of the audience, and everything you've said is you've hit everything that we had put out onto social media. And one of the things I wanted to draw on for some of the folks that might be interested in diving into some of the research and some of the things that we've discussed is I'm going to share my screen briefly and show you an article that Dr. Johnson, you showed me when I was earning my associate's degree in the scholars program, and it really kind of hit home for me. So I'll just briefly share my screen, and maybe we can touch on just a little bit of that. As you've said, so here, done by, can you see it okay?
Sure.
Dr. Brian R. Flay from Oregon State University. He's a social theorist. Here are his credentials here, folks, so you all can get a look at that. He was actually at University of Illinois, Chicago when he did this, but he's now at Oregon State University. And he actually shared this whole presentation with me upon you sharing it with me initially. I was so influenced by and inspired by what he had discussed, because a lot of what you've discussed now is some of what we discussed in the scholars program. And you use some of these articles to deepen, and in some ways actually bring closer to the surface what it was that you were talking about. And I was so inspired by this work and what you said, because when I hear, both when I'm observing what's going on downtown and also hearing what you're saying, you can begin to see some of the complexity, but also some of the simplicity. And when we think about behavior, I'm seeing, let's say supporter A and supporter B. I don't even want to say Trump supporter or anything like that, because I think we can get lost in that. But you see supporter A on one side and supporter B on one side. And my question was, are either of them wrong? As you touched on, are either of them wrong? Are we all really just saying the same thing? How can I, as an observer or maybe a supporter of people A, how can I condemn or damn or shun the supporter B? I can't, because we are all fundamentally operating from our behavior. Our external behavior is all influenced, as you said, by what it is that we've decided to whether that be where we live, what we believe, where we worship. And when you talk about this notion of stepping into Disney World, he imagined something that was different from what he saw, and yet he was also still influenced by his biology, his social context, and his cultural environment, right? And as you can briefly see, a lot of these things are broken down into various concepts. So as you dive into behavior, as we're talking about this, folks, you can kind of start to see that, yes, you can't really blame person A and person B, but what about something different? I don't want to condemn person A or person B, because I myself have been in both spots. But how do we step away from that reaction, right? That reactionary behavior that says, my social context tells me that, people with flannel shirts are dangerous and you stay away from them. So my external behavior is now my behavior is now shaped by, influenced by that bias because of my social conditioning. And so that's why person A and person B, I think when we're reimagining our collective humanity, if we can start to not see them as, oh, you're my opposition, because they're not saying anything different than they are. They're just using a different tone. They're using different words, different tones in different places. But I think what I'd like folks to start to think about as we move into part 2 next week, or a couple weeks down the road, is if what I'm doing, thinking and believing and voting for at the ballot box or voting against, if those things are going against the fundamental ability for anyone to access food, water, safety, and shelter, that's where the problem is, I think. And I think sometimes we can get so enmeshed in our cultural environment, our social context, in whatnot, that we forget to see. I mean, even looking at this, that's complex, right? I would not tell you that I am proficient or a master of all of these things, or concepts, but when you can see the complexity of it, but the simplicity I believe you touched on is that intrinsic knowing that, hey, I'm not going to kill my neighbor. You
Right.
know, there's something that tells me that that's wrong.
Right.
And I think that, you know, as you pointed out, as you observed my observation, and I'm refining it more and more with you, which is always a blessing. We do have to look at the individual responsibility and to look at, well, is my belief harming somebody? You know, is my, you know, or is my belief in support of, you know, a political party? And again, I don't think anyone is perfect. No one party is perfect. No person is perfect because it's made up of imperfect people. But how can I reimagine how I'm thinking about my knee-jerk reaction to say, well, someone's telling me that a Black life matters, and I'm saying, well, blue life matters, and all life matters, because no one is saying Black lives matter. You know, it is not an antithesis to what you're saying. You know, is not an antithesis to that. Now, if there was an antithesis, and I didn't want to get political per se, but if there was an antithesis, if Black Lives Matter stood in antithesis to a white person being alive, or a Latino person alive, or a green person being alive, or a yellow person being alive, then there would have to be a different conversation. But when our conversation or belief is around how do we collectively use our individual power to, you know, help our neighbor, or as you said, you know, I'm going to church. You know, we have less than a minute, folks, but we'll probably pick up in part two. But how is my belief either hindering or advancing a more collective and civil and respectful society? So I want to say thank you for being here, and I would love to invite you back for another part.
Sure, absolutely.
To have another further discussion.
Okay.
So any parting words?
Just work toward cultivation of awareness and understanding of the self. That's where I think a lot of it starts.
Thank you.
Or it comes back to that anyway.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. And we look forward to feedback. And our information will be on Facebook as well as LinkedIn, so you can stay up to date with us on social media. And we'll see you all back in a week or two. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander.
Thank you. Oh, one moment. Are you still there?
Want me to leave?
Okay. Well, no, stay here.
Okay.
Hey, Marcus. Hello?
He's connecting the audio. He's muted right now.
Hey, Marcus.
Hiya, how are you?
Good. This is actually my mentor, Dr. Johnson. Marcus and I met today on OfferUp, and we actually had about a 2-hour-long conversation about a lot of what you and I jumped into, and it happened very organically.
Okay.
So, can you see us?